Welcome to Speaking Your Language, the AI podcast that is focused on how you really implement AI into your business. No hype, no noise, no jargon. And today's special guest is Simon Drinkwater of Vantor Advisory. And the reason he is here is because this first episode is focused on the people. And people is a massive, massive part of business implementation of AI. I'm going to let Simon introduce himself and tell you why. So over to you, Simon.
Hi. So, I'm Simon Drinkwater. My business is called Vantor Advisory, and our focus is always on the people aspect and the organizational aspect of adopting AI. Many people think about you start with the tech. From my perspective, is very much you start with the organization as a whole, which includes the people, and then you work your way down. So I spend my time trying to look forward, if you like, into the future and think, what's technology doing, and then bringing it back to the sort of the reality of, well, what does that mean today? And I'll always start with the leader, make sure they understand what AI is about and how it could help their business. And then we can dive our way down deeper and deeper, ultimately down to the workforce.
Great. Well, I'm glad to have you on because we've worked together for a long time.
We have.
And I think we swum in very similar ponds, but people often get confused, don't they, when talking to people in AI, because everybody has different focuses in different areas. So let's really get into, I'm a business owner. Let's start there, right? I'm a business owner and I come to you, Simon, and say, I'm looking to bring an AI into the business. Where do I start? What's your go-to for that?
So my starting point is always them. The leader, if you like. So the person who ultimately is going to be making the decisions around, well, where do we go on this journey? How do we go about it? Do we need to invest? Do I need to change the shape of things? So I'm always going to start with the business leader and ask them questions about themselves. What do they understand AI is? What do they think are the challenges they're going to face? What do they think the opportunities are going to be? And that gives me a good sense of, where they're at. Now, one hand, if they're really sort of up to date, up to speed, they've got their fingerprints all over it, then we can dive deeper quickly into more about, well, so where's this going to go within your organization? If they're in a place where, like, I don't really understand AI, I don't really understand where people fit, where data fits, where governance fits, then it's a different conversation.
Yeah.
And every leader, every business is going to be unique.
Yeah. And I think the first thing we can say to anybody that's in that position where they're unaware of what's going on, the reason that we do a lot of talks, for example, and are doing this podcast is to just start listening to what people are saying about this. And also, I think the thing that people forget is you can learn so much from AI just from a large language model like ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot. You ask it about itself, right?
There was years ago in a company I worked in, they talked about restless curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what you've got to think about for yourself as a leader, and then with your people. You need to be really curious about, well, what is AI? What can it do? What are the risks? What are the upsides? How can it help me in my job today? How could it help my team?
Yeah.
There's so many questions. And as you say, you could use ChatGPT or whatever to sort of try and get some answers to those.
Mm-hmm.
But bottom line is you've got to go on a journey of discovery.
Of course.
And, that's, for me, that's the exciting bit.
Yeah. And, I think when we're talking about business leaders coming and speaking to you, that's typically sort of SME size, I would imagine, more.
Yes and no. So I've, yes, of course, SMEs probably what I would say would be my target audience. But in reality, I've had a lot of conversations with public sector senior leaders as well, and equally in sort of private sector. There's, in some ways, I would say that, all of this is sector or business size agnostic.
I agree.
It still boils back to, you only know what you know. I think the more interesting bit gets probably when you start talking about different organizational sizes is how quickly are they going to move?
Yeah. And the reason I asked that question is I think sometimes in larger organizations, you can have a disconnect because there's transformation experts that are tasked with implementing AI, but they don't necessarily get a steer from senior leaders on why or what direction. They just say, we need AI in the business. And that can sometimes happen at an SME level. And they say, we need AI because everyone else is using it.
So I can give you an example, but probably going back about 10 months or so, I had a reach out from a member of an HR team of a global financial services business. And she was like, I'm just looking for someone to help us with AI in the HR space. And I asked a couple of questions. I said, oh, okay, fine. So, this has obviously come from the top of the organization. It's like, the CEO just said to all the directors, we need AI in our business, go do it.
Yeah.
And then I found that they went a few questions later. It's like they'd brought somebody into marketing, somebody into sales. They were looking for someone to come and help in HR. IT weren't fully on board. It was, it was a great case example of like, this isn't the way to go about this, guys.
Yeah. I mean, we see a disconnect now, when, especially in much larger organizations where, technical teams, data teams, they're off doing a million things with AI, and the operational teams are kind of like, well, okay, we'll fend for ourselves ultimately. And they're trying to find their way in the space. And it does stem from a top-down strategic approach, right?
It does. It starts there. But again, I think you also sometimes have to appreciate, and I've been fortunate in my career to work in different organizations and backgrounds. And the last one before I sort of set up Vantor Advisory was a Microsoft partner. Now in there, you've got a lot of techies and people really interested in technology, et cetera,
Hmm.
et cetera. And yeah, they would rush off ahead, learning, in their own time, they'd be
Yep.
playing with technology. That's just what they like doing. Well, other people in other departments don't do that. So you are creating this bigger disconnect immediately of people who are interested and capable and people who don't really know and just sort of, at a different point. So it comes back to leadership. I've got to guide that and help try and shepherd the
Yeah.
whole business and all the people within the business on that journey at the same time.
And I think also there's a sector challenge.
Mhm.
So if you look at, a lot of work we do is in construction, for
Yeah.
example, business leaders who are doing these things, a lot of them are getting themselves really clued up. And actually, some people say to me, "Oh, you work in construction." "Oh, I'm not surprised." Well, actually, no. A lot of the business leaders in there are very clued up on what they need to do. They just don't have technical teams
Yeah.
as broadly as, like, for example, in law firms and
Yeah.
things where they're technically on computers all the time, so they have bigger tech teams. But
Yeah, but
you
you
know,
also, there is a lot of sort of evidence coming out through sort of research and surveys and stuff, which generally does say that, the leaders of a business tend to be ahead of the curve in learning and understanding AI, because they've got access to licenses quicker and they've got a
mhm,
chance to play. And let's be candid, they probably have got that learning mindset. That's why they're in the roles they're in. But then the workforce perhaps haven't been given access to some of these opportunities and are getting left behind. Whether it's construction or another sector, there's a lot of similarities there that leaders are the ones who are pushing forward. But they've got to remember, they've got a whole bunch of people behind them they've got to take with them.
that's a very good segue, actually, because I think if you don't bring people along on the journey, you've got a couple of friction points and challenges there.
Yeah,
One is the sort of, shadow use. It just happens in the
yeah,
business and it kind of comes in and merges in. You don't even realize it's happening. And the other part is fear,
yeah.
worry. So, as a business leader, somebody that's trying to bring AI in, what's your first step? You've now understood it,
Yeah.
at least. What's the first step of actually practically implementing it from a people perspective of what to think about?
So I will pretty very much talk to them about that we're going to go on a change journey. Right? We're going to have to take your people on a journey, and they are going to go through a range of emotions, and as you've alluded to, and so one of them is having a little bit of a think about, what's the culture of your organization right now? What type of people have you got? Are they risk averse? Are
Mhm.
they the type that perhaps don't like learning? Are they very set in their ways? So you're going to start a conversation with the workforce,
Yeah.
and you're going to try and build levels of trust and reduce anxiety. You know, and there's nothing wrong equally with being vulnerable and saying, "Look, we don't know everything, guys. We know we need to bring AI into our organization because we can certainly see there are opportunities, but we realize it's going to be difficult for you. Could be a bit of a bit unsettling."
Yeah.
So I think that's really my next point is, look, you're going to start a conversation with the workforce, because they can also help you as well, and they'll help you accelerate quicker.
I agree. I think we always say the people that are in your business are the most important part of making AI
Yeah.
implementation successful.
Yeah.
And if you don't set the narrative from a strategic level, they don't get on board.
Yeah.
And if they don't get on board, you have massive blockers.
Well, they're the most important thing in anything. AI, forget it. I mean, this is a bit I think I find I sometimes smile wryly about, which is we keep talking about, people, we need people on board because that's how we move AI forward. That's never been different. It
Yeah.
just happens now that the thing we're all talking about is AI. It was always the same when you're implementing things, be it systems, new policies, practices, whatever, solutions, etc. So yeah, you're going to take them on this journey, you're going to bring them on board, and then you're going to start getting into the conversation. Right, how can we help you become more skilled?
Yeah.
How are we going to, what's the impact on your role? What's the impact on your team, etc. So we're starting to work our way down from that leadership level, and we're sort of raising awareness through the organization as we go.
Yeah.
And then, all being well and good, we get the benefit on the way.
Do you know what I think the big difference is now, though, and the bigger challenge, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, but typically people might be able to use little tools on the side to help
Yep.
their day to day. Now, because AI is capable of so much, even just from a large language model, ChatGPT, Gemini, people can leverage it to do things that they probably shouldn't be doing
Yeah.
externally to the system. Whereas before, you would have just waited till a system was built internally or use a spreadsheet or all these
Yeah.
different things. So do you think there's that sort of problem of, well, it's here, people are using it, and we need to kind of get almost a grip around it?
Yeah, we absolutely you need to get a grip around it. I mean, look, you'll understand the data risks better than I will, and there's other cybersecurity risks, etc. But yeah, if I think about it from, well, how are we trying to take our people on this journey? Then you have to put some kind of governance around. You have like you do with any other part of running the business. There will be some kind of policy that you're going to put in place. Say, right, this is how you can use AI. This is how you can't use it, etc. These are the tools you can use. Here are the tools you can't use. So you've now made it clear to people what's acceptable and what's not. And then you can start thinking about other things like, well, can we bring some of our enthusiasts together to start really exploring the
Yeah.
true potential of it? Maybe they've just had more time. They're the ones who outside of work are playing with AI on their own. And, you've got to find those opportunities to bring the right people. They can perhaps accelerate you whilst you're trying to support the people who are a little bit more
Hmm.
nervous. But there's a role for everybody. But you've got to do it in a sort of coordinated way,
Yeah, I agree.
without getting too formal about it.
Yeah. So get the governance in place. Well, first of all, learn about stuff, get governance in
Yep.
place, help people in your organization understand how you want to leverage AI and how they're a part of that process,
Yep.
and what I suppose as well, what the motive of the organization is. Because I'll be honest, a lot of people talk about, oh, people are going to lose their jobs. I would say nearly every single person we work with has never had that motive. They're
Yeah.
always about giving back time to people because
Yeah.
we're all too busy.
Yeah.
That goes across the board. Doesn't matter what sector you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I talk about this thing called what I affectionately call the capacity conundrum. Yeah. We've got to give people time and space to learn this new tool or tools. But to do that, you've got to sort of, I said, free them up from whatever they're doing day to day, because ultimately the tool will give capacity back.
Yeah.
It's sort of, it's so there's challenges there again that a business has to think about in terms of how do I give my people time to learn the tool so that we get the benefit later on. But yeah, capacity is a big part of a conversation for me around AI.
Definitely. And I think you're going to have some quick wins, high impact, low risk, doing those kinds of processes. But the bigger change comes when you start looking at your actual, data workflows, automations, how you highlight all of that. It's that whole end-to-end process, which is a bigger change piece.
Yeah, it is. And again, look, if I think about it from the people side, and this is why I talk about it as very much a really long-term journey that's going to be continually, your business is going to continually evolve. Because, let's try and break it down to you've got a small team and they're starting to find more effective ways of working, and actually they're creating capacity. And then you're saying as an organization, well, let's reuse that additional capacity they've created for more valuable work or whatever. But let's just say we also realize that there's some new opportunities over here. Then that's a different skill set, or perhaps it's a change to someone's role. So, you're now saying to somebody, well, I'm just going to drag you a little bit away from, let's just say, I know, marketing. I'm going to drag you across over into another little space to do some other stuff. Now their role's evolved. But in another 6 months, they've applied AI in that space, their role evolves again. And roles will just keep evolving and evolving and evolving. So you'll hear people talk now and say, the idea of a singular role will disappear.
Yeah.
You're just going to evolve. But you've got to coordinate that amongst a sizable workforce, possibly.
Yeah. I mean, there's been some, quotes that people have said, like, I mean, several people have said this, but people won't lose their jobs to AI, but they will
Yeah.
lose their jobs if they're not able to adapt to an AI
Yeah.
implementation workforce. And I think the biggest challenge, we're talking about, I'll come on to the younger generation in a second, because I do think that's a potential impact. But what they're not talking about is, older generation that aren't necessarily tech savvy as, people between the ages of sort of 20 to 35, because they've grown up with tech, right? They've had the tech in their lives. So that adaptation curve is a lot harder, I think, in kind of people of that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you could again look at it another way, which is, AI is by all accounts at a base level very straightforward to use.
Mhm.
They say talk to it, have a conversation with it. Well, I'd like to think probably the older generation are quite good at that. You know,
100%.
that's what they've been brought up with. The bit that's scary is when you start saying it's technology, it's artificial intelligence. I had a great chat with somebody the other day who said maybe we've given it the wrong name. It should not be called artificial intelligence. If he doesn't mind me using it, I'll use his phrase. He said, just call it easy magic. And if I said to you, do you know what? If I said to my mum who's 80-year-old, I can give you some easy magic to make that little task a little bit easier for you. Do you want that? Do you want to have a go?
Yeah.
They'll probably go, yeah. If I said to her, do you want to use artificial intelligence? But what?
Yeah.
So there's, I think the generation one is a really interesting one. I come back to, it's about whether you have a curiosity to learn and try different things.
I think you're right, because obviously older generation has so much more experience, knowledge that's built up in certain industries. The big challenge, like you say, is yes, you can chat to it, but actually you have this force that's coming the other way, which is, well, okay, well, that's just very small part of what AI does.
Yeah.
Again, it's prompted it to give you back certain results. The knowledge part is being democratized by AI. They're saying we have the knowledge on all these things. And what's coming through in the sort of the younger generation is, well, now if I can do that, it's the logical operational thinking to go, if I can do that with that and I connect it to that and then I can connect it to that.
Yeah.
They're calling it almost, the maestro
Yeah.
role. And I think that's what the old generation is the understanding of process, technology process. And this is a generalization, by the way. I should say that this is not about saying this is everybody. This is a macro view, not a micro view of what they're saying is the problem. So how do you feel about that? What do you think?
Well, would you say it's a general view? I can agree with that, and I can disagree with it. Probably the bit that I think's more interesting when you get to the generational conversation is, again, I'm going to make a big sweeping generalization. The younger generation don't necessarily know how to operate within a company
correctly. Yeah.
There are rightly or wrongly sort of ways of doing things, ways of operating, and the real challenge for any business is to take the upside of both. The people who've been in the workforce for longer, who have all this experience, they understand the context of things, they have judgment. To then the younger generation who probably have a different level of enthusiasm, they perhaps are getting, as you say, the flow of it all a bit better, or they certainly pick it up quicker. And the real challenge for a business for me is how do you bring all of that together, and you don't end up with these silos.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a big challenge is going to come.
Let's talk about the younger generation in a bit more detail, because I think the biggest challenge, and I worry about this for my daughters, their biggest challenge is how do you get the experience? And okay, it's not going to mean that we're not saying AI is going to eradicate jobs at this point, but it probably will stop people hiring more junior roles in the capacities they were. So where do they get started? There's I think there was the last numbers that came out was around 800,000 graduates unemployed in the UK. Where'd you go with that?
Well, if I had the answer.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But what do you think? What do you think? Do you think we need to
look, your kids are younger than mine. So mine are sort of 19, 20, 21 years old. And one of them right now has been going through exactly that, applying for jobs, etc. And I think back to when I was his age, I'd pick up some work quite quickly and easily, and I'd get on the ladder and I'd start building my way. The opportunities just are far less available. Problem now is we're going to probably start drifting back into what I call the education system now, and how we've got to, this is a big systemic shift now. This isn't just about I'm going to make some tweaks to my organization, I'm going to make some tweaks to onboarding and this and the other. This is a much deeper thing around, well, what does experience look like? Where do you get it from? I think the biggest challenge that a business has right now, or one of the biggest challenges, certainly the large ones, is how do you redefine learning pathways and career pathways for your people?
Yeah.
What is a career path now going to be anyway?
Absolutely.
Whether you're starting at 19, you've just got your foot in the door at least, the next number of years, what's that look like?
Yeah. And do you think the responsibility resides with business owners? Because I think, we're all, generally on this movement of, well, what can we do with AI? It's very exciting to go. But we're kind of forgetting that whole pathway side, because we think right now we're in that, excitement period of getting stuff implemented and doing these things.
Well, I there's certainly a responsibility around leaders. To come back to your point earlier, you said, the people that will lose, you'll lose your job to people that can use AI better than you. Well, there's only so many people that can use AI better than probably the people you've got. So, as a business leader, you've got a choice. You can say, do you know what? I'm going to take a punt and go and see if I can find some more people that are better equipped than my people, or I'm going to really put some energy into my people and make them better.
Yeah.
And I think you have to go with the latter. Personally, I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
it's just a simple supply and demand
I think this
conversation.
is the problem. You could talk about it all day because then you could counteract it with, well, actually, they're the people with all the knowledge. So why would you get rid of them? And you can go round and round in circles.
Well,
And that's the
they
challenge
have the
right now.
context of your organisation. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
I think that's the big challenge. But let's get into some really focused use
yeah,
cases. So what have you seen implemented well from a people perspective? Obviously, keep it anonymized and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but where have you seen it work well?
So really, again, a different company I've come across in the financial services space. I had a long chat with them, who I think have done this well. Is the first thing they recognised that they had a CEO who was very much bought into the fact that AI was going to make a positive difference. So they had an energy from the top straight away. What then I guess they started to realise though was, this was going to be a long journey. So they accepted that point quite quickly. And then it's more about an iterative journey that they go on. So they started to ask their staff about, how are you feeling about this? What's your level of
Mm.
capability? What's your competence? So they started to get some intelligence, if you like, about their workforce and where they were at. And they built from there. And so it's been, I spoke to them originally 10 months ago, I think. And they'd already been on the journey for about 10 months prior to that.
Mhm.
But they were just sort of showing that it'd been an iterative journey. They still didn't have the answers. And they've come back to me recently and just said, actually, would you come back, perhaps look at perhaps doing another piece of work with us? But they recognize that this is just evolutionary. Yeah,
Yeah.
there is no route map. There is no clear set way that says this is the way to introduce AI. There's lots of things coming out now that says, look, these are the sort of things you should be doing and thinking about. But that's a really good case study for me. Is they were taking their time, but they had alignment at the top of the organization to start with, and they were flowing it down, and they were giving people space
Yeah.
to sort of learn and grow, etc. And they had some governance in place as well.
No, I think that's a really good example. What about bad implementations?
Well, a bad implementation probably wasn't even defined as an implementation. They just allowed AI in.
Okay.
And so, so that's implementation suggests there was a control, some control around it. The worst ones I've seen really is where, they've just given licenses out and now, they're months and months down the road and you ask the questions about, have you got some governance in? What do people do? And they haven't.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what have you done to upskill your people? Well, they haven't.
Yeah.
That to
Yeah.
me is, and I've come across a few of those and you're like, okay.
Well, I mean, at that point, you start having people put spreadsheets into cheap licenses of large language models, and they've got training turned on, and that's getting passed out. Then they say,
Yeah.
"Well, how likely is it that that's going to go into the system?" You don't know. That's the problem with training large
You don't
language
know
models,
exactly.
right? So, if you've put in very sensitive data in, not only are you probably in breach
Yeah.
of some major regulations like GDPR and
Yeah.
all the different things, you just don't know what's going out there. That's your IP and information, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
But it is, I think that is the worst case of implementation really, because I said a lot of organizations just I don't really think are on what I'd call our coordinated implementation pathways.
mhm.
It's a bit of this, it's a bit of that. And that to me is the bit, you have to accept this is a program that you're going on, or a change program, as I would say it is. And therefore you've got to have some control over it. Or at least
Yeah.
some, guiding it on the way.
Absolutely. So to summarize, understand,
Yep.
start there, and then from there, look at what kind of governance and things you would want and controls you'd want to put around
Yep.
in place as a starting point, and then speak to the people and,
Yeah.
and help them understand one, what your motive and direction is,
Yep.
and then ask them what they're actually doing right now and what their
Yeah.
knowledge is of the space and how they could help.
Yeah, I think that's a very simple way of doing it really, is that, and remember, you can always come back and tweak the governance and tweak the policies
Absolutely.
later, but you just got to get that engagement. You've got to raise the awareness levels, get people to at least start to understand what's arrived or what is coming, if you like, within their organization and take them on the journey. And they'll educate you as a leader probably as much as you're going to educate them.
Absolutely.
No one has all the answers is the simple point.
No, and that's it. Like you said earlier, it's accessible now. AI is making it easy for people to just even experiment, try
Yeah.
things out, prototype, and do those kinds of things. And you should be encouraging them to do that. So I think training, like, we mentioned training at a top level, but give your staff the right training as well and
Yeah.
make sure that they're understanding what their capabilities are and direction.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, going back to sort of our basic stuff, and it sets somebody a bit of a vision or a long an endpoint and then help them on that journey.
Yeah.
So if you can set them some kind of vision which says, think this is how work could be one day with us in this organization, and you're going to help us get there. Yeah, that's quite empowering. So I think that's a big part of it. Really, is the role of the leader. Now, I would always talk about this separately. This whole thing as the AI sprint that needs a marathon plan, and the leader of the organization is basically going to be the person that sets the pace for that run. And they're going to make sure the organization is prepared before it gets to the start line. And when it's on the start line, it starts running, the leader is the one who's going to help guide and cajole. But it's going to be a team effort to complete it. No one runs big marathons and endurance runs on their own. They have a team.
Yeah. And I think the process is the same, whether you're a team of 6 people or a team of 6,000 people,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think it fundamentally is.
Yeah.
There's always going to be nuances, but yeah, fundamentally it's the same thing.
And would you give somebody the responsibility of being an AI lead? Would that be something that you would encourage, or do you think it stays with leadership?
And depending how you define the role, I don't see anything wrong with that at all. Ultimately, accountability sits with the leadership team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it has to. But if you want to put some control around it and perhaps make sure you're picking up the opinions of your workforce, you're putting in the right training places, you might need someone to sort of take a lead on that.
Yeah.
If you're going to put a lead, somebody who's leading on something as important as marketing or sales or whatever else, if AI is that important to your business,
yeah,
why would you not put somebody leading it?
Yeah. And we're very lucky to have Next Gen AI sponsoring this podcast, which is an event happening in June.
Yeah.
And link will be in the description. But 10% off for anybody that's listening to this. And it's going to bring all the business leaders together to hear from experts in the industry and how they can encourage and advise that. And I think that's a really good starting point to kind of go and do training, is to go to these events, mingle with people, chat to people like ourselves who are doing this all day every day.
There are loads of loads of things online you can go to. There's loads of events you can pop to. You can just go onto YouTube and follow people who are just saying, this is how I use Copilot, this is how I use ChatGPT. But you just got to be curious. And then I come back to that point. You've got to be curious.
And I think follow people like yourself on LinkedIn who putting videos out all the time. They're just little nuggets of information. They're going to keep steering people.
It's trying to, it's only where I come at it. What I'm trying to do is stimulate thought. As I said, it's, you can make a decision today as a leader about this is the path we're going on. But if you haven't perhaps gone a few steps down the path just to see what's there, you don't know, you might make a decision today that's going to bite you on the bum down the road.
Yeah.
And that's very much how I see my role really, is trying to be a few steps ahead to help leaders make decisions now as best they can that aren't going to backfire down the road.
Yeah. And we'll include your details as well. So
Thank you.
And what's your website?
www.vantoradvisory.com.
Brilliant. Excellent. And a new rebrand recently. Yeah, that's why you had to think about it. Okay, awesome. Let's just close off it's been great chatting, Simon. This has been really interesting. Quick fire. If you can recommend one book, one tool, and one piece of advice, what would it be?
Well, I'm going to cheat.
Or podcast. You can use
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was going to say there's one that I was listening to called The AI-Driven Leader, which you can find on Spotify. And I think, if I remember rightly, the guy who wrote it is a guy called Jeff Woods. But that's a really good sort of starting point I suggest for any leader. What was that? So that's one book, one podcast, one tool. Well, look, I'm going to be, this is not a plug or anything, but I just be fair right now, and people will probably shoot me down who are in better space than me. Copilot, just works for me. But the reason it works for me is because I know it's in a secure environment. People I know will say Claude is probably better right now, and Claude Cowork and all this other good stuff. Great. But for me, that it works. It does what I need it to do. What's the third one?
One piece of advice.
One piece of advice. Just be curious. I'm sure I probably nicked that from some Ted Lasso thing, but
I'm sure, but
it is, be curious about this. Don't be afraid of AI. Don't be afraid of technology. But be curious and embrace it, because it ain't going anywhere.
I think that's great advice, though.
It ain't going anywhere.
That's exactly right. Yeah, be curious. I think that's a good way to be. And who doesn't love Ted Lasso?
Well, I had to drop him in somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Simon. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
We'll be back with another episode. Thank you.